After checking out the strength of using real GDP per capita as a measure of development, here in this video, let's look at the weaknesses. Okay, and the first weakness is you find that the coverage of GDP is limited. In other words, in your introductory econ or intermediate macroeconomics, we discussed that GDP does not cover any homemade or underground output. Okay, in other words, anything you DIY at home, the government has no way to trace back, like the market price, your DIY stuff, and the quantity, and even the resources you spend. Okay, so for these things are pretty much just left out of the government officially reported GDP. Okay, so if the GDP itself is not perfect, of course, real GDP per capita is not perfect either. Okay, and one thing I would like to bring up to your attention is here when we talk about underground output, it's not necessarily illegal stuff people produced. Okay, like the cocaine smuggling in Myanmar or prostitution in Thailand. Okay, we're not talking about just these. Actually, we focus more upon the legal things produced, people produced at home. Okay, for example, someone lived in the mountains, okay, like a very rural area, and so they produced a lot of food for themselves. They make clothing for themselves, right? And so all of these, again, without the government's acknowledgement. Okay, so when government collect and report output, they have been, left out. Okay. All right. So this is the first weakness. Okay, about the coverage of GDP. The second one is because GDP as a single number gets a lot of attention. Okay, not just on the public media, but also for the assessment or evaluation purposes. Okay, so it gives the government officials a very strong incentive to cheat. Okay, and it's pretty easy to cheat. Okay, because again, what finally need to be presented or reported is just a single number, right? And if they can simply manipulate the number, then they could look better than reality. Okay. Now the incentive behind the cheating behaviors could be like they can easily get re-elected or promoted. Okay, if the economic performance is a primary consideration of promotion, okay, or re-election. Okay, so if it's manipulated or cheated, of course it's not reliable. Okay, and a third weakness is there might be some bias comparison across currencies. Okay, so we know different countries are using different currencies, and when they report their real GDP or real GDP per capita, they always use their own currency, domestic currency. For example, when Japanese government reported their real GDP per capita in 2020, they use yen. Okay, when Indian government reports their national output, they use Indian rupees. Okay, when Chinese government is doing that, they use Chinese yuan. Okay, they're not going to use these U.S. dollars, and because domestically on their markets they use their own currencies. Okay, for each transaction. So it's natural for them to collect and report in their own currencies. However, when we make the cross-country comparison, then the problem is we have to convert their own currencies numbers to the US dollars or international dollars, which is could be artificially created, okay, for comparison purpose. But we know that the official exchange rates could be distorted or manipulated, okay, once again by the government, okay, purposely or unpurposely. Okay, now here we got to fix that problem, right? Like for example, for decades, we should say that the U.S. government said that Chinese government has been manipulated its currency, okay, to make it undervalued or depreciated, so that China-made goods would be cheaper on global market. Okay, so this could help them boost their exports, okay, which eventually lead to more contribution to their economic growth. Okay, again, for us to better understand that claim, okay, or argument, and we have to understand the official exchange rate. Okay, so it's reported by the government. Okay? Especially for the countries where their foreign currency market is heavily influenced or even controlled by the government. Okay? For many advanced developed economies like the United States, the government is not an active player on the foreign currency market. In other words, the value of the US dollars versus Chinese yuan or Japanese yen or euro is determined by the supply and demand of the market. Okay? However, later, we would introduce more details. Like in some countries, they're not doing that. Okay, like they controlled the exchange rate, just like they control, for example, the price of gasoline. Okay, and or many other things. Then if the price is not free to go up and down, then the official exchange rate might be distorted. Okay, and a simple example could be if there's no government intervention, if 1 US dollar is equivalent to 5 Chinese yuan. Okay, just as an example. Now, with the government intervention, we find 1 US dollar is equivalent to like 7 Chinese yuan. Then you could say that the dollar is artificially stronger, okay, because of that the Chinese government intervention, and the Chinese yuan is artificially weaker. Okay. So because of these, then economists come up with an alternative measure. It's called the PPP or GDP PPP per capita. Now, to understand this, we have to briefly talk about a very important economic concept called law of one price. Okay? Law of one price means if we look at the same thing, okay, the same product in different countries, because they're exactly the same, so their price should be equivalent in different currencies. Now, for example, if a Big Mac, a hamburger or a cheeseburger, sold at McDonald's is, let's say, $5 each. Okay, and in Japan, it's sold the same Big Mac. Okay, is sold 500 Japanese yen each. Then we believe, based upon the law of one price, same thing should be sold same price. If converted to the same currency, then 1 US dollar should be equivalent to 100 Japanese yen. Right, 500 yen divided by $5. So it's 1 to 100, right? And once again, it's the same thing, the same rule can be applied to, between the US and China, between the US and Australia, okay? And so these leads to a related concept called PPP, purchasing power parity. Here, parity means equality. Okay, means the two currencies should have the same purchasing power. When they buy the same product. Okay, so the relative purchasing power of 1 unit of each currency can be easily calculated on the basis of law of one price. Okay. Now here, let's briefly talk about a very famous index, PPP index. It's called Big Mac index. Okay. Now let me switch to the this is the website of the magazine The Economist. Okay. Now the screen is a little narrow. It's not wide enough to cover all the information here. Now this Big Mac index, here you find on your left hand side there are many countries listed here. Okay, and for each one we're looking at between 2000 and 2020, are they undervalued or overvalued in comparison to the US dollars. For example, here if we click on Canada, now let me move this the screen towards the right so you can see on your right hand side. I'm sorry about this. Okay, now here it says that a Big Mac cost $6.77 in Canada, okay, in Canada dollars, and $5.66 in the US, okay, US dollars. This implies the exchange rate should be 1.2. So we're using 6.77 divided by 5.66. Okay, so we get this 1.2. In other words, $1 should be equivalent to $1.20 Canadian dollars. Okay. However, the actual exchange rate we observed on the market is $1.28. That means the Canadian dollars is 6.6% undervalued. Okay. Of course, the US dollar is overvalued. Okay. So by using the same thing, we can look at, for example, Singapore here. Okay, the Singaporean dollars is 21.7% undervalued, and Thai baht, the Thai baht is 24.9% undervalued. Okay, so again, the same idea. We can look at the different countries. Now let me switch back to the slides. Okay. So if you want to know more about how exactly the PPP or law of one price works, and you should go ahead and look at the second worksheet I gave you, okay, where you would be able to find more hands-on problems. Okay, so we're gonna walk through that again, the second worksheet together during our class meeting, to give you a deeper, more solid understanding of the PPP, because it's actually a very important measure. Okay, we're going to use that throughout the semester. Okay, the drawbacks of the PPP, of course, it's not perfect. Okay, and first of all, the coverage of goods and services. Okay, for example, Big Mac, it's just about Big Mac, right? So as we said, we find that based upon the Big Mac, Thai baht is like 25% undervalued. What about if we switch to like Ford F-150 pickup truck? We may end up with a different number, right? So which one we should use? That's a problem. Another problem is a variation of the quantity of goods and services. For example, in India, because of the the religious reasons, the Hindus don't eat beef. you won't find the Big Mac with beef. So how could you compare these two, right? So these are the problems.